In what's going to appear to be tantamount to hypocrisy, today I'm going to be discussing, are bikes getting too complicated? Now, I don't mean specifically that maybe when you think about complicated bikes, you might think about the suspension kinematics of it, or even the design and form and function. But what I'm thinking about specifically is actually the very way that you have to set up your bike to ride. Now, this discussion come about from one simple thing. When we first made Have Blue, we had the opportunity to use a prototype shock by Nitroshocks. And Kev's been a really cool friend in the industry, and I love people doing disruptive things that are different and really test what we expect from the industry. So seeing a small startup take something that is basically tank technology, we'll talk about the Oleo shock a little bit later, and putting it on a bicycle is pretty disruptive, especially in a world where the choice is air or coil. So that's interesting to me. Of course it would be interesting to me. Where does that come in to this complexity? One of the things that would stop people when they saw it and they would ask me about it would be that the actual Oleo shock itself that they had no rebound or compression adjustment on it. It just has one dial on it for dialing in the actual preloading the gas inside it to make sure that the actual weight of the rider is set up correctly on the shock. So there's no real adjustment on it. And frequently I get asked by people, but how do you adjust it? Now, the shock itself is self-adjusting. So without delving too much into that, let's pass that and set it away. And let's ask ourselves the question, without using things like ShockWiz or any of those kind of apps and stuff like that, do you actually know how to set up your suspension? And do you know, personally, what good suspension feels like for the right conditions? You see, I have pretty particular tastes on suspension, and I'm lucky enough that I can just get someone else to do it for me, so it does what I like it to do. But I'm gonna admit something. When it comes to suspension forks, I don't have a great deal of innate knowledge of how to get them to work how I like them to work. And I'm going to segue off slightly as well into how useless I feel that rear shocks are. So my last big crash was caused by, and I mean really big crash, not like going for a boo. My last really big crash was caused by de-racking my bike from a car and not checking the rebound was correctly set up. As I pulled it off, it twisted the rebound setting on the shock, and it was an air shock. But I took my first drop on the bike, and the air shock rebounded so strongly that it threw me off. And the shock itself, which was one of the earlier but still a relatively new shock, was a Fox one that you could turn the rebound to zero basically, and it just created a kind of like a cross between a pogo stick and an improvised explosive device. So why does it have that? That's mostly useless. So this conversation, this isn't tech details. This is kind of a philosophical conversation on what it means to ride a bike. Now, having the options on your bike to do your compression, high and low speed compression, rebound, and off the top and stuff like that is good. But how many of you really know how to set it up and be like totally honest with yourself? Like, put your ego aside. I put mine aside. Put yours aside and say, do I really know what I'm doing here, or am I just kind of fiddling around with it because it's there? So when we're at a convention or bike show, one of the first things that people do when they come up to the bike is they'll pull on the brake levers, and then they push the forks down, and then they fiddle with things like dials and stuff on the bike. And I think that's, that's something that starts when you're basically like a toddler and never leaves you. It's the innate desire to fiddle with things. Now, Richie from Bottomland or Richie from Silverfish, both perverts, both do things like that. So the innate, desire to fiddle with things is there. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Joe Cantello said that when he got DFA back from Fort William, that everything was absolutely messed with to high heaven on there, where people would like fiddle around with it. And I said, that's kids, like kids. And he was like, no, it was like grown adults. It was like members of the press and stuff just turning the dials on the Olin shock and in 10 to see what happens. But obviously you can't see what happens because you're not riding it. It's just on a stand. So it's really, really kind of an odd human trait that happens. But we all kind of do it. And I saw it at the London bike show. One of our bikes didn't even have a wheel in it, and people were still pulling the brakes. Anyway, it's just like, I on the last day, I couldn't help myself. By the last day of the convention, I'm really tired and really, really irritable. So I just go up to him and go, what did you expect to happen? So I was watching, I like the YouTube videos. I like watching videos of riding. Tim likes watching things that are cinematic, like Death Grip and stuff like that. I like watching point of view videos, like Nate's Friday Ride things, and I like pretending I'm there. That's really sad. But I like being immersed in it and feeling like, so I love like point of view rides. But someone went out for a ride on Ollie Wilkins. No, Sam Reynolds or Ollie Wilkins? Sam Reynolds, gappy guy, brilliant at sending it. And they said like his shock's like 300 psi, his tyres are like 60, like it's unrideable. And I was like, well, that's set up for him to do his jam. But also like I personally, I run really hard tyres. I always have. In a tube tyre, I run about 40 psi. If I ride Antistinioga, I run 50 to 60, and everyone's like, I can only choose between 23 and 25 psi. That's what I like. For me, like when I ride on tyres like that, I feel like they're just about to pop off the rim. I can't stand it. I don't feel loads of grip. I just feel squirrely at speed, and I do it accordingly. And I run my suspension probably I overpressure my suspension or coils by probably about 30%. So I feel like I like a taut riding bike. And I always have. My excuse for that tendency is literally to do with the fact that when I started riding downhill bikes, bottoming out felt incredibly bad, like the bike was going to die. And tyres, if you didn't learn to run them hard, you'd literally spend your life with punctures or running the tyres off the rim, and it was and the drag on them. You until you've run a Nokian Gazzalotti 3-inch tyre, you really don't know what a heavy wheel is. Like I can't even explain to you what a heavy wheel on a 60-pound downhill bike feels like. It's really something else. So. We got a set of the DVO barrel forks from DVO, and they're their simplified version. But I still feel that even in their simplest format, they have a lot more adjustability than a regular person will need. In any way, shape or form. They just have way too much. Are we so vain that we feel that we need the pro factory setup? Or would the industry really, really, really benefit from starting to make products simpler and more usable for the consumer at the expense of pros? Because do you know what? The pros aren't running exactly what we're running anyway. Most of the time they got some black box going down, So we're having these complex shim stacks and systems that make it hard to service. There's 10 dials on your fork and they all do all these things and you don't understand what they do, and you think you do, but you might you might have a grasp of it. You don't really. I don't really understand forks that well. I know that they're good or bad. I get arm pump or I don't. They're juddery or not, and fiddling with them until they're just okay. I feel like taking the range that we have at the moment, which is like this, and moving it to a usable range that's like this would be better. If you had 4 clicks of adjustment on, you know, each side of compression and rebound until you get your feeling right. You know, that feels like the right direction to move in for me, for the consumer. And I think it's kind of odd that we're almost proud that we are funding and kind of compromising what we do so that the pros have what they need. And it's a kind of technological vanity, I think, that we're stuck in. That we feel that we're, you know, if we use the same equipment as a pro, that we'll be just about as good as them. And I think that's probably a bit short-sighted, because most pros that I've ridden with are so supernaturally good that really any advantage won't bring you closer to them. Enjoyment of riding should come from the products being made for the user they're intended for. And I'm starting to feel that we need to have a real sit down with ourselves and ask what it is that we need our products to do. Unless you are racing upwards of, let's say, 20 to 30 races a year, you don't need race componentry. You need stuff that allows you to ride better and ride more. And I feel like the industry should start to turn towards that. And it wouldn't take much to do it. If we could just put our vanity aside for a moment, we'd end up with bikes that were a lot easier to ride, a lot simpler to maintain, and a lot more fun to use. Because you wouldn't have this big gaping void of nothingness on either side that suits the 1% of riders who are so tuned in that they can tell the difference and that they can gain 0.1 of a second on something. So that's kind of my musing, is should we be moving stuff? When we when we were designing Sleipnir, Lee said to me that he could make it probably about 10%, the suspension 10% better if he had additional linkages and we changed some things and that sort of. And I said, no. I would rather have the removal of a linkage. I'd rather extend the life of the bearings by an indefinite period and lose 10% of performance. And he looked at me like I was a lunatic. But I was like, this is what I'm going to push on this product, is that every time that you get this bike, every time you go to ride it, it's ready and it's there. And when it comes to service it's a one beer job. You come home after work, you crack a cold one, you pop the 4 bearings out, you spray it down with a jet washer, you clean it all out, you dry it all off, you pop some grease in, pop the new bearings in with a bearing tool that comes with the frame, and then you ride for another 3 years without ever looking at it again. That's what you want from a bike. Sitting down for 3 days with 400 different sized bearings, bolts and all of that, I mean, it's absolute insanity. You're not fast enough to warrant that kind of attention to detail. You're not good enough for it. I'm not good enough for it, you know? And that doesn't mean I'm not going to still develop, you know, ridiculous skunk work prototypes that, you know, push the envelope, because that's fun, that's what we do. But for the average rider, for everyday riders, starting to head towards a line where we can find a simplified, fun platform is going to be a real thing. And then we're going to start talking to fork manufacturers as well. At the moment, we're a tiny fish in a very big pond, and they might not listen to us, but they might listen to you if you think it's a good idea as well. But also, if you disagree with me, and you might, that's a good thing too, because you could literally be saying, well, I don't know, man, like, I set mine up at the shop and they're better than anything that I could do. That you bought the DVO barrel versus the diamond and you found it restricted you and you could get a better setup out of the diamond. That's, you know, I'd like to hear about that too. I don't mind being wrong because I don't have all the data. I haven't spoken to every single rider on the planet, but I'm kind of speaking to you guys now. Final thoughts on the Oleo shock. When Alan Millyard brought out his first prototype bike, it just about blew me away. When the second one came out, the single-sided swing arm and the it was it was amazing. It's still inspirational to me a decade later. I still don't think it's been bettered in terms of sheer balls. And one day I hope to, with Alan's permission, remake a modern version of the Millyard bike. And we have the technology to do it. So probably just make one of them just to see if we could do it. But I feel like that'd be amazing. And that bike is actually simplicity incarnate. Everything about it is simple, despite its complex looks. The Oleo shock is a third kind of damper. It's not a coil. It's not an air shock. So it's normally the technology they use on tanks or when a plane lands, like the suspension unit like that. And it's very simple. It's basically like to do with like needle, oil, and nitrogen. And it's the harder you compress it, the more energy that it takes to do it. So you'll find that when you're running an Oleo shock, if you hop off a curb, you use about half the travel. If you hop off a house, you use about 3/4 of the travel. It's very odd. The rebound curves it's like this, in speed terms. So it goes like, and it's really weird. Like, it's hard to explain, but it moves so fast, but it slows towards the end, like an extension. So it moves like out and then slows down, and it feels like that. So when you go through like routes, it's like, but it's getting all the energy. It's a very unusual feeling. It makes your bike feel totally different, alien to you. But then when you look on Strava, it's miraculously a lot faster. It feels very odd. So watching NitroShocks deliver that is going to be an interesting thing. It's been plagued with technical issues because it's very, very simple, but there's a lot of energy going through it, so it is put under immense pressure. And they're very diligent people, so they just test and test and test and test and test and test. They're very patient. They've been wanting to bring it for market for a very long time, and they haven't because it needs to be perfect. So we're interested in watching that because it opens up a whole world. A single pivot bike feels very different when you have an Oleo damper on it. Very, very different indeed. So we'll see how that progresses, but we're proud of what they're doing at the moment. It's one of the things where people stopped us when we had it, and they were concerned how they would change it, how they'd be able to change it. And it's one of the things that started this very conversation in my head. But it works really well. Why do you need to change it? They're like, I don't know. I just want to be able to change it. So, but your only change could be away from making it good. Well, I don't know until I find that out. It's like, but it's optimized and it's self-optimized. I want to change it. I wouldn't buy it because I can't change it. It's like, it's a very human attitude to have when you think about it. I would rather have the option of it not being good. I'd be interested to see your thoughts on this one. See what you think about it. It's Sunday. I'm going to go and have about a bucket of coffee, slam some pancakes down my neck, and then get ready to ride Black Mountains on the 4th of July. Oh, say, can you see by the shreds early light? I'll never sing again. I love you all. Have a absolutely amazing weekend. Bye-bye.